I hadn't planned on ending up in a stranger's garage, smelling like engine oil and stale coffee, with my backpack doubling as a pillow. But when you're broke, tired, and out of favors, you start making peace with strange places. 3 days earlier, I was sleeping on a Greyhound bus. I'd left my last city with $200 and a duffel bag. The money didn't last. The bag had holes. And the only lead I had was a Craigslist post for day labor and shop help, no experience needed. The shop was 3 hours outside Portland, a town so small the gas station doubled as a diner. I figured even if it didn't pan out, at least I'd tried. The address led me to a squat, brick building just off the highway, Barlow Auto and Machine. The sign was faded, one of the letters dangling loose. A dozen rust-stained trucks lined the dirt lot. The air reeked of motor oil, and something about it made me feel like I could maybe breathe again. The garage door was open. A man stood, hunched over a workbench, his sleeves rolled up, hands black with grease. Mid-40s, I guessed. Stocky. Bearded. The kind of guy who looked like he could lift a car without the jack. "Hey." I called out. He looked up slowly, didn't smile, just stared for a beat like he was trying to figure out if I was lost or dangerous. "You the one who called about the listing?" "Yeah," I said, stepping in. "Saw your post online. I'm kinda in between places right now." That was putting it mildly. He wiped his hands on a rag. "Name?" "Cam." He nodded once. "I'm Rick." That was the entire interview. He gave me a broom and pointed at the back corner of the garage where piles of scrap and shredded tires sat collecting dust. "You clean up back there. We'll talk after." So I swept. For hours. My arms ached. My stomach growled. I didn't care. Rick didn't talk much. He didn't micromanage either. Just went back to his work, wrenching and welding and muttering under his breath about parts suppliers and kids who don't know a damn thing about real engines. By sundown, the place looked decent. Cleaner, at least. He handed me a cold can of Coke without saying a word, then nodded toward the metal stairs that led to a half room above the office. "Loft's empty. You can crash there for now. Shower's in the back." I blinked. "Seriously? You want a hotel?" he asked, cracking open a beer. "Go get one. You want a place to stay? That's it." I nodded. "No, yeah, I thank you." He shrugged. "Don't make a mess. Don't steal my shit. We'll get along fine." And that was that. I dragged myself upstairs. The loft wasn't much, just a mattress on a wooden frame, a cracked window, and a view of the garage below. But after a week of buses, rest stops, and park benches, it might as well have been a 5-star suite. That night, I showered until the water turned cold and lay on the mattress staring at the ceiling, wondering who the hell this guy was, why he didn't ask more questions, why he let a stranger sleep above his shop. But the next morning, he handed me a cup of coffee and said, "You good with changing oil?" I nodded. "I can learn." That was the beginning of our routine. I swept, I sorted tools, I learned to take apart brakes and change air filters. Rick didn't praise or criticize, he just expected things to get done. Sometimes we worked in silence, sometimes he'd put on an old rock station and hum along while tuning a carburetor. He never asked about my past. I never asked about his. But over the next few weeks, something shifted. Like the way he started keeping a second coffee mug on the workbench, or how he'd slap my shoulder when I got something right, or how he'd linger at the bottom of the stairs at night like he wanted to say something but changed his mind. Then one night, everything changed. It was a Friday, hot as hell, and we'd been under a truck for 6 hours. My shirt was soaked through, and I was scraping grease off my arms when Rick came over, a beer in one hand and a strange look on his face. "You got a second?" "Yeah," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me, not in the way you look at someone who owes you rent or broke a tool. No, this was different. "You ever think about sticking around longer?" he asked. I blinked. "What do you mean?" He looked away, scratched the back of his neck. You're good at this. You learn fast. And, well, I don't really like working alone." That last part hung in the air. It was the closest thing to vulnerable I'd ever heard from him. "I've been thinking about it," I admitted. "Honestly, this is the most stable I've felt in months." He nodded, slowly. "Yeah, thought maybe you could use more than just a mattress on a plywood floor." I stared at him. "You want me to move in?" He laughed, gruff and quick. "Hell no, I like my peace and quiet." Then his eyes flicked back to mine. "But maybe you don't have to stay up in that loft forever." There was something in his tone. Something that wasn't about work or engines or rent. Something I didn't quite understand yet. But I wanted to. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and burnt toast. I had gotten used to it, the small comforts of the garage loft. But today, Rick was in the loft with me before I even opened my eyes. Not sitting, not leaning against the wall, just standing there, arms crossed, looking at me. "Morning," he said, gruff but calm. "Morning," I muttered, still half asleep, trying to gauge whether I was dreaming. "You up for breakfast?" he asked. "Or are you just gonna lie there all day?" I swung my legs over the mattress and rubbed the sleep from my eyes. "Yeah, I'm up." He nodded and motioned toward the corner table where he had set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "Don't get used to this. I make one decent meal a week." I laughed softly, more at the absurdity of it than anything else. He didn't join me, just leaned back against the loft railing, sipping his coffee. I noticed how his eyes followed me as I ate, careful, deliberate, not leering, just attentive. Something in his gaze made my stomach twist in ways I wasn't used to. After breakfast, we went back to the garage. I followed him around as he jacked up a beat-up pickup, handing him tools and wiping my hands on a rag every so often. The work was physical, exhausting, and I loved it. I loved the clarity it gave me, the simplicity of tightening bolts, checking fluids, or scraping grease off a caliper. No bills, no eviction notices, no reminders of how broken my life had been for the last few months. Just me, the engine, and Rick. By the end of the day, the sun had dipped low behind the shop, casting long shadows across the dirt floor. I was wiping sweat from my face when Rick spoke. "You hungry?" I nodded. "Always." He opened a cooler he kept near the office. Sandwiches, not fancy, but filling. He handed me one, then leaned on the workbench, watching as I unwrapped mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The garage was quiet, except for the faint hum of a fan overhead and the clinking of tools from the other side of the shop. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't felt in months, not from fear, but from the quiet intimacy of sharing space with someone who didn't just tolerate me. He seemed to genuinely notice me. Rick cleared his throat. "You've been here a few weeks now." "Yeah." "You good with it?" he asked. His tone was neutral, but there was a pause before he added, "Not just the work, this loft situation." I swallowed, suddenly self-conscious. Honestly, it's the first place I've felt stable in a long time, like I belong somewhere. He nodded slowly, and I caught a fleeting softness in his eyes. "Good. I don't like letting people just drift through here. If you're gonna be around, I'd rather you stick around for more than just a week at a time." I felt my chest tighten. "You mean like moving in?" He shrugged. "Loft's empty most nights. I don't care if you sleep there. Just don't be a ghost. We'll work together, eat together, talk. You get used to a rhythm around here. I like it when people notice it." I nodded, words failing me. There was something in the way he said it. Something personal, unspoken. The kind of thing that wasn't just about the garage or the engines. Something more. That night, as I lay on the loft mattress, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Not in a shallow crush kind of way. I'd had those before. But in a way that made my stomach flip and my chest ache. The thought that maybe Rick actually cared about me, in his own gruff, impossible-to-read way, was terrifying and intoxicating at the same time. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept imagining him downstairs, bending over an engine, catching the light just right in the grease-streaked beams, the rough planes of his hands, the way his forearms flexed when he lifted a tool. The warmth of his attention when he spoke to me directly, even if it was just about oil filters or spark plugs. A few nights later, something happened that changed everything. I woke to the sound of footsteps on the loft stairs. Groggy, I squinted at the dim light seeping in from the garage windows. Rick stood there, a flashlight in hand. "Garage door jammed again," he muttered. I swung my legs over the mattress. "I can help." "No," he said quietly, then hesitated. "I got it." "But you awake?" I nodded. He shifted, then sat on the edge of the loft, close enough that our knees brushed. I felt an electric jolt through me. He didn't pull away. He didn't speak. Just watched me. For a long time, we stayed like that, the air between us thick, charged. And for the first time since arriving, I realized that this wasn't just a temporary shelter or a place to crash. Rick had taken a personal interest in me. Not pity, not charity, but interest. And it was terrifying, but I wanted it anyway. The next morning, I woke before the sun, the loft still cool with the faint smell of oil and dust lingering in the air. I hadn't slept well, not because of discomfort, but because Rick's presence the night before had left me on edge, mind spinning with possibilities I wasn't ready to name aloud. I made my way downstairs quietly, hoping he was gone, but the shop was already alive with the low hum of the overhead lights, and there he was, sleeves rolled up, hands smeared with grease, as he worked on a stubborn engine mount. "Morning," I said, voice hoarse. He didn't look up. "Morning." I lingered, unsure if I should actually be there. But then he straightened, wiping a hand on a rag, and gave me that subtle nod, the one that said I was allowed, even welcomed, to be present. "Coffee?" I asked, gesturing toward the pot on the counter. He shrugged. "Yeah, sure." We didn't sit together, we never did, but we were in the same space, moving around each other like planets in a slow orbit. He passed me a wrench, hand brushing mine, and I felt it. A pulse, something electric that made my skin prickle. By midday, the garage was unbearably hot. Rick paused, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand, eyes briefly catching mine. He didn't say anything, but the glance was loaded. I caught myself staring longer than I should have, and I knew he noticed. He always noticed. Later, as I was stacking tires in the corner, he came over. "You know," he said, voice low, "you're not half bad at this, faster than most kids your age." I looked up, meeting his eyes. The corners of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Thanks." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just notice it. You've got skill. You pay attention. Makes a difference." It wasn't flattery. Not really. It was something else. Care. Consideration. Personal interest in the way someone might notice another person for reasons deeper than appearance or utility. We worked in silence for a while after that, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead filling the pauses. Then he suddenly straightened, stretching, and muttered, "Gonna be late. Got a job pickup." I watched him go, feeling something tighten in my chest. The garage felt emptier without him, even with the noise of tools and engines. I realized I had begun to depend on his presence, not just for shelter, not just for work, but for the rhythm he brought into my life. A few nights later, he came upstairs to the loft. I was sitting on the mattress, notebook in hand, sketching out a plan for the next day's work. "Can I talk?" he asked. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual, but my heart kicked into overdrive. He leaned against the doorway, one hand resting on the frame. "You don't have to stay up here forever," I blinked. I know, but I feel, I don't know, safe here." His gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, like the moment had caught him off guard. "Yeah," he said. "Good. That's good." There was a pause, heavy, charged, and I realized he hadn't moved closer. Not yet, but the air between us was different, tighter, warmer. "You're different," he muttered finally, as if admitting something to himself rather than me. "What do you mean?" I asked, voice low. He hesitated, eyes flicking away, then back. "Not like anyone else, not like most people who drift through my garage. You matter." More than you should. And I don't know why. I froze. My pulse thundered in my ears. I'd never had someone say that to me. So direct, so personal, so entirely unpolished. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He finally stepped back, rubbing the back of his neck. Don't freak out. Not trying to, make it weird. But it was weird. And it was perfect. I realized then, lying on that thin loft mattress, that this was more than a place to sleep. More than work. More than survival. Rick was noticing me. Really noticing me. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without worrying that the air would collapse around me. That night, I didn't sleep, but it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake. It was anticipation. Anticipation for the next day. For the next look. For the next moment, Rick might reach out in whatever way he decided. Because I knew he would. The next morning, the garage smelled of oil, metal, and Rick. Not literally him, but his presence lingered in the space. The easy authority, the quiet heat of someone who owned every inch of this place. I followed him down the stairs to the shop floor, trying to act casual. But my heart kept betraying me, hammering against my ribs every time he glanced my way. "You're up early," he said. Not a question, more an observation. "Yeah, couldn't sleep," I admitted. He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I wanted to say. "Same here sometimes. Engines don't care if it's night or day." I chuckled nervously, gripping a wrench too tightly. We got to work on an old van, the kind that smelled like decades of rust and gasoline. He showed me where to tighten the belts, how to check the brake lines, but I noticed his hands lingered a little longer when he passed me tools. The brush against my fingers wasn't accidental. It never was. My chest tightened with a mix of fear and excitement I couldn't name. By mid-afternoon, the sun was dipping low, painting golden streaks across the garage floor. Rick wiped his hands on a rag and leaned back against a lift, regarding me. "You've got potential," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then, louder, "Hey, come down here a sec." I followed him toward the corner of the shop, away from the van. He stopped and leaned against a stack of tires, arms crossed, watching me like he was measuring me, weighing my reaction. "You comfortable up in the loft?" he asked. I hesitated. "Yeah, it's fine. Better than anywhere else I've been lately." His eyes softened, just slightly, and I felt my stomach flip. "Good." I was thinking, maybe it's time you didn't feel like you're just crashing here. This place, you belong here if you want to. I blinked. "You mean that?" He nodded. "Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I like my space. I like my quiet. But you're different. I don't usually let people stick around. But you make it easier, somehow." Something in the way he said it, the raw honesty, the subtle care, hit me like a punch to the chest. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I appreciate that." He studied me for a long moment, then leaned closer. Not too close, just enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Don't misunderstand," he said. "I'm not asking for anything weird. Just noticed, that's all. You're not invisible." I nodded, words failing me. My pulse was pounding. His presence, so steady and strong, felt impossible to resist. The tension between us was thick, tangible, and for the first time, I realized that this wasn't just about a loft or a garage. It was personal. That evening, after shutting down the shop, Rick came upstairs. I was in the loft, half reading a manual, half watching the city lights glow through the grimy window. "You still awake?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah." He stepped in, leaning against the railing, arms folded, his silhouette outlined by the dim overhead light. "Don't worry, I'm not here to boss you around. Just wanted to check in." I swallowed. "Check in about what?" He shrugged. "How you're holding up, that kind of thing." There was a silence that stretched long enough for me to notice the subtle shift in the air. It was warmer, heavier, charged. "Sit down," he said finally, nodding toward the mattress. I did, hard hammering. He He sat beside me, just close enough that our shoulders brushed. I felt the weight of his arm, not resting on me, but near enough to notice. My stomach twisted. "I don't usually do this," he admitted, voice low. "Let people in. Let anyone stick around. But you're different. And I don't want you just passing through. I want something more." My throat went dry. I don't know what to say. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Just stay. Be here. That's all I'm asking for now." It was simple, honest, and somehow completely intimate. Not a touch yet, not a kiss, but it was enough to make me feel exposed, noticed, and alive. That night, I didn't sleep again. Not from fear, not from worry, but from anticipation. The feeling that Rick's attention, his quiet, careful, personal attention, wasn't just for survival, wasn't just about the garage. It was something more, something dangerous, something I wanted. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the faint clink of tools from below. I lay on the loft mattress, thinking about the night before. Rick's words echoed in my mind. I want something more. The memory of his presence, just sitting beside me, shoulder brushing mine, left a heat lingering in my chest that I couldn't shake. I got up quietly and made my way downstairs. He was already in the garage, crouched under a truck, muttering about a stubborn bolt. When he saw me, he straightened, wiping grease from his hands. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my chest was tight. "You ready to learn something new?" he asked, tossing me a wrench. I nodded, my hands trembling slightly as I took it. We worked in silence for a while, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional scrape of metal filling the gaps between us. Every time his hand brushed mine or his arm moved close enough to make me notice, a jolt ran through me. I was hyper-aware of him in a way that made the engine grease feel almost electric. By mid-afternoon, the sun had dipped low, and the garage was hot and sticky. I was wiping sweat from my forehead when Rick approached, his eyes catching mine. "You staying for dinner?" he asked, voice low. I hesitated. "Sure, if you don't mind." He smirked faintly. "You're making it sound like I'm forcing you." I laughed softly, a little too loudly, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. Later, after we cleaned up, he called me over to the loft. I climbed the metal stairs, heart thudding. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the mattress. I obeyed, sitting near the edge. He perched beside me, close enough that our thighs nearly touched. I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You know," he began, scratching the back of his neck, "I don't usually do this. Invite people up here, let them stay." I swallowed, aware of the tension between us. I noticed. He gave a short laugh, almost nervous. "Yeah, well, there's a reason. You're not like the others. You notice things. You care. You're different." I felt my chest tighten. "Rick?" He shifted slightly, leaning closer. Our shoulders brushed, and the contact made my stomach flip. He didn't pull away. His hand hovered near mine, not touching yet, just close enough that I could feel the heat in the space between us. "I'm not saying this to freak you out," he said, voice low, "but I like having you here. More than just around the shop. More than just someone to clean up my messes." My throat went dry. I feel the same." He finally let his hand rest near mine, fingers brushing lightly. It was tentative, careful, but deliberate. Electricity shot through me. I didn't move away. I couldn't. For a long moment, we just sat there. The loft was quiet, except for the distant hum of the city below, our breathing, and the faint creak of the floorboards. The tension was thick, almost unbearable, and yet it was perfect. Then he leaned just a fraction closer, enough that I could feel his warmth more directly. I could smell the faint scent of engine oil on him, mixed with soap, and it made my head spin. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly, eyes searching mine. I nodded, unable to speak. Slowly, carefully, his hand brushed mine. Not forcefully, not aggressively, just a tentative, testing touch. My pulse skyrocketed. I swallowed hard, aware of every nerve ending in my body as he let his fingers linger. "That's better," he muttered, almost to himself, but the heat in his voice made my heart hammer in my chest. For the first time since I'd arrived, I realized this wasn't just about a loft, or shelter, or surviving. It was personal, emotional, intimate, and I wanted it. Wanted him. That night, the loft felt different. The city lights glimmered faintly through the dusty window, but I hardly noticed them. My attention was entirely on Rick, sitting beside me, his hand still resting near mine, fingers occasionally brushing against mine as if testing boundaries. Each touch sent sparks up my arm, a heat I couldn't ignore. I don't usually do this," he muttered, voice low, almost uncertain. I swallowed hard. I know. He shifted closer, and this time the brush of his thigh against mine was deliberate. My pulse raced, and I felt a thrill in my chest I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't just desire. It was the intimacy, the awareness that he was noticing me in ways no one else had. "Are you okay with this?" he asked quietly, eyes searching mine. I nodded, barely able to speak. "Yeah. I want this." The moment hung between us, heavy, electric. Then he finally closed the distance, just slightly, resting his shoulder against mine. It was a small, careful contact, but it felt monumental. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, the solidity of his presence grounding me while simultaneously setting my nerves on fire. "You're different," he whispered. "Not like anyone else. You matter." I felt my chest tighten, overwhelmed by the gravity of his words. "You matter to me too," I admitted. Slowly, he let his hand rest over mine. Not a bold move, not yet, but intimate enough that it made my stomach twist. My fingers twitched against his, and he mirrored the movement, letting them lightly interlace. It was tentative, careful, but deliberate. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. The loft was quiet except for our breathing, the faint hum of the city, and the occasional squeak of the floorboards. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't pressured, it was slow, deliberate, intimate. Every brush of skin, every glance, every shared breath felt like a declaration, a wordless understanding that neither of us had expected, but both of us craved. Finally, he spoke again. "I've wanted to do this for a while. Didn't know how, didn't want to screw it up." I tilted my head, heart hammering. "Do what?" He exhaled, a low, shaky breath. "Notice you, care about you, this, everything." His hand squeezed mine gently, sending a jolt through my body. I leaned slightly closer, letting the warmth of our shoulders press together. "Rick?" I whispered. His lips were near my ear. "Shh, just feel it." And I did. Every nerve, every ache, every desire I'd bottled up over months of drifting through the city and crashing on strangers, couches ignited. I could feel him, solid, steady, impossibly warm, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. I felt seen. We stayed like that for the rest of the night. No words, no demands. Just the quiet, personal intimacy of two people slowly discovering each other, realizing that connection could exist in a place as gritty and mundane as a mechanic's loft. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't want to leave. The following week, everything shifted. We fell into a rhythm that wasn't quite friendship and wasn't quite romance, but something in between. A careful dance of proximity, touch, and glances that lingered a second too long. I would work on engines, passing him tools, our fingers brushing deliberately, and feel a thrill that made my chest tighten. Rick, for his part, seemed both aware and restrained. He never pushed, never forced anything, but the way he watched me, the way he would let his hand linger near mine or offer a brief touch to my shoulder, made it impossible to ignore the growing tension between us. One evening, after the shop had emptied and the sun had set, I found him leaning against the loft railing, arms crossed, watching me organize tools. "Hey," I said softly, approaching. He didn't respond right away, just tilted his head slightly, eyes studying me. Finally, he said, "You've been quiet today." "Just thinking," I murmured, heart thumping. "About stuff." He nodded slowly. "About us?" I blinked. "Maybe." There was a pause. Then he stepped closer, the faint heat from his body brushing mine. "I like having you here, Cam," he said. His voice was low, almost husky. More than I expected, more than I should admit. I swallowed hard. "I feel the same." He leaned just a fraction closer. I could feel the warmth of his breath against my cheek. "Then don't pull away," he whispered. I didn't. Not that time. Not ever. Once he began letting himself in. Slowly, deliberately, his hand found mine. This time, it wasn't tentative. It pressed lightly, confidently, as if claiming a small, sacred space. My fingers curled around his instinctively. My body felt electric, every nerve ending alive. "Rick," I whispered, barely audible. He leaned closer still, until his lips brushed my temple. It was soft, almost shy, but it made my knees weaken. "Cam," he murmured, voice shaking slightly. "I've been holding back. Don't want to scare you, but I can't anymore." I tilted my head, heart hammering. "I'm not scared." That seemed to settle something in him. His other hand came up to cup my jaw gently, thumb brushing my cheek, and he pressed his lips to mine. Slow, exploratory, teasing at first. The weight of him against me, the careful strength in his touch, the warmth of his body. It was overwhelming and perfect all at once. I responded instinctively, leaning into him, letting myself feel everything I'd been denying for months. The loft felt smaller, warmer, and the world outside disappeared. It was just him and me, pressed together amidst the smell of grease, metal, and lingering engine oil. The raw, tangible reality of this place made it even more real. When we finally pulled back, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, and I could feel the steady beat of his heart. "Was that okay?" he asked, voice husky. I smiled, barely able to form words. "More than okay." He let out a low chuckle, fingers tracing light patterns on my hand. "Good, because I'm not done noticing you yet. Not by a long shot." And that night, lying on the loft mattress, shoulder to shoulder with Rick, I realized that home wasn't a place. It was a person, and I had found mine. The days that followed felt surreal. The loft wasn't just a place to crash anymore. It was ours, a private world above the garage, alive with small routines, quiet touches, and the electric tension that had finally found release. Rick and I fell into a rhythm that was both comforting and thrilling. Mornings started with coffee and silence, sometimes a shared glance or the casual brushing of hands on the mug. Days were spent elbow deep in engines and grease, passing tools and exchanging fleeting touches that left me flushed. Evenings were quieter, more intimate as we lingered in the loft, talking about everything and nothing, hands occasionally brushing until they intertwined. One night, after a long day of work on a stubborn transmission, Rick sat beside me on the mattress. His arm rested lightly on my shoulder, casual yet deliberate. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought I'd feel this way, about someone like you." I turned to him, heart hammering. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I mean, I've always been alone in this shop. I like my solitude. But you make me want more, make me want to let someone in." My chest tightened, and I reached for his hand, holding it firmly. "You don't have to be alone anymore. Not with me." He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something vulnerable in his eyes, something he rarely showed anyone. "You sure?" "Absolutely," I said, my voice steady even though my pulse was racing. He leaned closer, pressing his forehead to mine. "Good," he murmured. Then, almost shyly, his lips met mine again. Slow, deliberate, full of the quiet intensity that had drawn me to him from the start. I responded eagerly, letting myself melt into him, into the warmth of his body and the honesty of his touch. We moved together carefully, exploring boundaries we had both longed to cross, every touch and kiss deepening the connection between us. It wasn't about rush or urgency. It was about trust, attention, and desire, all wrapped in a way that made the loft feel like the safest place in the world. When we finally pulled back, breathless and smiling, Rick rested his forehead against mine. "I've waited a long time to feel this, to feel you. And I've waited a long time to feel the same," I whispered. We didn't need more words. The loft, the garage, even the city lights below felt secondary to the warmth, the intimacy, and the unspoken promise between us. I realized then that I hadn't just found a place to sleep. I had found someone who truly saw me, who cared, who wanted me not just in his loft, but in his life. From that night on, everything changed. We worked side by side, laughed, shared meals, and built a rhythm together. The loft became home, not because of walls or a mattress, but because of the person in it with me. And Rick became everything I hadn't realized I was searching for. Protector, teacher, partner, and so much more. I had started as a homeless, desperate guy, drifting from place to place, unsure of where I belonged. And now, lying in that loft, wrapped in Rick's warmth, I understood something vital. Home isn't a place. Home is where someone cares enough to notice you, to let you in, to stay. And I was finally home.